So, Russ, we are rapidly approaching this year's conference. For people that are still unfamiliar with it because they've been living on Mars, give us the mission and the purpose behind the conference. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? What's the goal?
Okay, so when we started doing this back in sort of 2009, 2010, it was to bring together people specifically in the London area to try and establish what represents best practice and plagiarize and nick good ideas from each other. And that was basically in a pub holding hands, just discussing how difficult our job was. And it sort of grew from there. And at the same time, I was running the Southeast IFE CPD program.
Mhm.
And so I was getting used to organising events and bringing in expert speakers on relevant subjects. So I had a bit of a sort of, that was my apprenticeship, if you like. And so after a period of time, it became more formal and we started introducing a number of speakers. We started then having people travelling from abroad to come to our events. And that's the sort of the genesis of it, if you will. The purpose now is to bring together people and have presentations on a wide range of subjects, all relating to high-rise fire safety, so that we can get all the stakeholders in one room. So an ideal audience for me would include architects, fire engineers, insurance people, equipment manufacturers, firefighters, building managers,
Mhm.
security professionals, FEMS, because they're all coming at this from slightly different directions, and we need
Mhm.
that sort of cross-fertilization of experience. And I see this way, but you see it that way. You design and build it like this, but actually, when we try and run it and operate it, you know, it doesn't work like that. It's that lived experience that meets the building design conceptuals. That's the thing. And then add into that mix, we try and get as many presentations from outside of the UK, so we're not very trying not to be parochial in, just talking about stuff in England, because I think that was a contributing factor to where we got to.
Mm.
So, so the
That
mission
might be
is,
a good bit just for us to expand on for a second, because, like you
sure.
say, I think people might be seeing the title for this episode, perhaps, Tall Buildings Fire Safety Conference, and think we're going to have an hours long conversation about Grenfell. Now, we may jump in and out and allude to it, but I think there'd be more benefit if you could just tap dance around for us and give us some snippets, some examples of some international cases that you're aware of where the assumptions of what should have happened perhaps didn't materialize.
Yeah. So the reality is, if you look outside the UK boundaries, there have been multi-fatality fires in
Mhm.
recent months and years.
So this
So
isn't just an us problem.
no. So at our US conference this year, we had a big case study of the Twin Parks fire in the Bronx.
Okay.
Example, we've had the fire in Istanbul with 20 odd.
Talk us through these a little bit one at a time. Just give us a minute or so on each. So what happened in the Bronx?
The Bronx was an electrical fire. We know that the majority of fires that start in high rise start with an electrical fault or problem,
Hmm.
which is now obviously exaggerated with obviously lithium-ion batteries and scooters and that kind
Hmm.
of stuff. So that was a high-rise residential block. The occupant left their flat, left the front door open. There was a number of problems with the internal fire doors, so smoke flooded the whole building, and it was a multi-fatality fire, and
Hmm.
caused a lot of soul searching in sort of the New York area, etc. But since then, we've had a fire in Istanbul, which was a fire in a basement, which was a nightclub. This was during the day, and
Hmm.
there was a fire. It was a construction site. It was a refurb, but the fire then broke out, permeated the rest of the building where there were people in there. It was during the day. Again,
Hmm.
the multi-fatality fire. So, these things, if you look at it from a worldwide perspective, these things obviously are happening at regular intervals, but I'm not sure that each country necessarily looks outside its own
No.
borders. So one of the missions of the conference, getting back to your first question, one of the missions of the conference is that shared learning
Mhm.
challenges, because we do have people saying, you know, let's take, for example, the single staircase issue, which is now
Yes.
probably possibly resolved. Since I've been running this, I've had colleagues from other countries saying, how can you possibly allow this to happen?
Hmm.
That
So
you're
just expand on that for people that aren't familiar with what the single staircase issue is, because again, they will be conditioned to a UK mindset and thinking, well, this is the same as it is everywhere because this is how we build tall buildings.
Yeah, right. So under what was current guidance. So if you think of things like British Standard 991 or
Hmm.
9999, that allows you, or that the guidance in there allows you to build a single stair residential building as high as you like. So, for example, in London, we have a high rise residential building, 52 floors with a single staircase.
Wow.
Now, when I mention this to colleagues from other countries, they say it's madness. We've never allowed that for that kind of height to have a
For a
building.
member of the public, help us understand what the problem is with that. I only need one staircase. I'm not that fat. I'm just, I need to get up and down
Well,
the staircase. What's the problem with that?
the problem, as far as I'm concerned, is that that's done because we've operated a stay put, remain in place policy. So, in other
Okay.
words, unless you're affected by fire, you stay in your flat where you're safest to be. So, if you're inside your fire compartment box, then you're safer to stay in there than to venture out and to try and escape. Two significant problems with that concept. Firstly, a lot of buildings that have been built in the last 20 years have not been built well. So it's not a fireproof box. We get the
Hmm.
smoke permeating and spreading around, etc., etc. And secondly, we've got this phenomenon now of social media induced evacuations. So if you're sitting in a residential block and all of a sudden your phone goes bing, and somebody said, "Do you know there's a fire in the building?" Even though you haven't got a fire detection system potentially, but somebody in another flat says, "Do you know there's a fire in the building?"
Hmm.
Um, and so we've
And you're
seen,
flooded with fears of getting stuck
yeah,
on the
and then
second floor with your two children, and your immediate reaction is, "Look, we don't know how bad this is or this isn't, but let's just get out." So the single staircase concept works under the assumption that the only people utilising that staircase are going to be first responders and the fire and rescue service in their efforts with their equipment and their bridgeheads and their procedures. That's enough space for them because that's what they need. But then when you add on top of that self evacuation, hysteria, panic, and members of the public trying to escape as that route of egress, that becomes terrible because all the smoke that starts flooding into that single staircase and people just causing panic, delaying our priorities, causing that fog of war in that mass evacuation, and that's when everything starts to spiral, I suppose.
and it's aggravated by goodwill gestures. So you get neighbours, running up and down corridors, banging on doors, saying there's a fire in the building because they think that's the right thing to do.
Of course, they're trying to save their neighbours.
And so what you then get is people all descending that staircase. Now that is the only staircase of which
Mm.
firefighters. Now we know from Grenfell that the firefighting lift didn't work correctly,
Yep.
so firefighters were ascending the stairs. We've now got contraflow. They're establishing a bridgehead, so we're running charged hose all up, and so we've now turned this staircase into an assault course.
Mhm. Very, very technical question, and feel free if we don't have this freely to hand. What's the mandated width for these staircases? Do you know how big does a staircase actually have to be? Because I find there's quite a good bit of variation in high-rise premises that I visit.
Yeah, so the logical path of this is you work out how many occupants are in the building, and then you calculate the stairs accordingly. Are you with me?
Yep.
Now that's generally how you do it for most other buildings, but again, in residential blocks, you're only really anticipating the occupants of the flat on fire and perhaps one or two other.
So is that what they base their calculation on? Is it?
That's what they base their calculations on. Now,
Right.
what I can tell you is if you've got to carry anybody down or move anybody down, I don't know. A good friend of mine was a senior officer at Grenfell Tower, and he's a big guy, 6'4", you know, kind of size, for firefighters. But with the BA set on, and he said his shoulders were almost touching either side of the staircase as he was going up the stairs. So
Yeah.
if you then put into that a line of charged hose, fill it with smoke,
Yeah.
I'm sure your listeners can probably work that out for themselves that it's a difficult cost. So the point is that there is evidence now that people are not staying put, they're not remaining in place, they're trying to leave, they're going to leave. And if the lift's not working, which is another issue, you know, we have I've been trying and asking lots of social housing providers to let me know what is their current failure rate of their lifts in terms of not working. It's not a popular question,
That information is not readily.
but
They
if you
can't. They don't
then
have it to hand, or they're very reticent to give it to you.
I think the most telling comment I had was a recent conference in the States when the fire chief from Las Vegas, which is, obviously
Mm.
a popular tourist destination, and he said their starting proposition when they turn up at a fire in a high-rise resi or hotel is that none of the equipment works. None of
Yeah.
that's their starting proposition, which is quite an indictment. But
Mm.
I'm sure that many of your listeners that are firefighters have turned up at buildings expecting certain things to work and they don't work. So you improvise, you adapt and overcome, which is what we're trained. What firefighters are trained to do. But yeah, so that's the issue for me.
I went to one recently where the riser box at the bottom, we were just testing it. And we just it was a charged riser, put a length on it and just to run a bit of water out of it, see how it ran. And the branch wasn't operating very well. And when we pulled it off, there was so much rubbish and stuff that had been put into this riser outlet. So when we switched it on, everything that started pumping out of it, there was just so much residue and shit. And I know I've heard stories of people finding needles in them blocking up the end of branches and all this sort of stuff because, especially when
Yeah.
it's a dry riser, people do post stuff in them.
Yeah, it's one of the tests that doesn't really get done. And good colleague that Brent Brooks, he talks
Yeah.
about this, which is one of the reasons why we advocate smoothbore branches for
Mm.
rise firefighting, because
Yeah.
the internal diameter of dry and wet risers, standpipes in the States, suffers from a thing called tuberculation, which is basically it's the internal diameter reducing because the metal is eroding, corroding, etc. So you end up with these large flakes plus other debris that you might get in there. Now, if you've got a normal hand control branch
Mm.
and you're about to make entry into a flat and you go in there, you might well find that within a very short space of time that the flow rate is significantly reduced because
Yeah.
it's congested with debris.
Well, it'll have a complex design at the end of the branch, which is designed to dissipate the cone and then bring it back to the center with the dividing veins and all this sort of stuff. And it's a very, very technical, complex branch. And I'm sure in a perfect scenario in the factory when you tested it, it was really great and you could study the droplet sizes and all that jazz. But you only need to start getting, like you say, some of that oxidized or the damaged stuff from the internal riser. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, all of that great technological innovation is useless.
Yeah, and I know Brent demonstrates this. He puts sunflower seeds into it, just
Oh, I do.
to 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 try and replicate what you're going to do if you get a blockage. Clearly, if you're in up close and personal, and all of a sudden you lose 50% of your water, it's your effectiveness is
Mm.
it's more than halved. It puts you in a pretty tricky situation. So,
Take us back to the international example. Sorry, I dragged you off down a rabbit hole.
oh no, it's fine. And we've had other fires in China that we know where electric bikes have caught fire in the basement ground floor area and flooded the staircases with smoke, leading again to multi-fatality fires. So I try and keep a handle as best I can from colleagues around the world on high-rise fires that are occurring. So I would say, and this is broad brush, but we're having a serious high-rise fire somewhere in the world about every 6 weeks. So, but of course, you're talking about a global sort of thing. So, and of course, we're always going to have fires, but
Mhm.
we need to learn from these, and we need to look outside our own borders. So, for me, the great thing about the conference is that we get international speakers in and say, "This is how we do it." So, a great example of that is almost off the bat. We've been talking about door curtains and the use of door curtains,
Okay.
and for his name's going out of my head now, Doctor
Michael Reich. We've had him on the
Michael Wright.
podcast.
Thank you. He came to one of our first conferences and said, "Look, you should be using door curtains," and
Mhm.
everybody sort of looked and said, "We've never used them. What are they?" And of
Yeah.
course, now it's kind of quite widespread, the
Yeah.
use of those. So
Put one on
that's
the compartment of origin, put one on the hallway, put one on the stairs.
perfect. And
Get them in
now it's
place.
kind of
Really quick to deploy. Fantastic. Reducing that ventilation profile, sustaining some of the compartmentation. It's a fantastic, simple design, which I think has been a real game changer.
so. I'm not claiming that we were instrumental in doing that, but I think we played a part in bringing that to this event,
Definitely.
smoke hoods, and things like that. So you know, that's the point of going back to the first question. The point of it is to try and bring as many voices in, look at some topical subjects, look at some
Mhm.
topical solutions, but not just from the UK, from around the globe. And provide a forum where people can come together and talk to colleagues from other industries, architects, etc., get them in the room. And that's why you'll see we've adopted this kind of a magazine format.
Yep.
So we used to cluster them over in days. So day one would be about fire engineering, day two would be about fire safety management, and day three would be about firefighting. And guess what? On day one, we'd have the room full of fire engineers, and day two,
Yep.
we'd have the room full of building managers, and day three, it'd be full of firefighters, and all the rest of
And you
them.
perpetuate that silo thinking accidentally.
So I deliberately mixed it up now. So people say, well, hang on a minute. 1 minute you're talking about this, and the next minute you're talking about that. So it's been
Yeah.
done deliberately. It's been
Because you
done.
need a holistic understanding of this complex problem.
Yeah. So I want somebody to sit through potentially a presentation which they probably think they've got no interest in, but then they'll think, hang on a minute, that's relevant, or I should know about that. Are you with me?
So take us through some of the voices, some of the speakers, some of the subjects, and try and give us a whistle-stop tour, kind of a teaser of some of the information that's going to be shared at this year's conference.
Okay, so it's 3 days, starting on the Monday, the 2nd of December, 3rd and 4th of December at London's Excel. It's part of FireX, which again is part of a rebranding exercise called Anticipate London. So,
Okay.
so the exhibition floor has got huge things for security, health and safety, FM, etc. But there is a section called FireX but we're in a mezzanine floor above that. So this is a proper seated auditorium. It's not in the exhibition floor with all the noise and distractions. So we've got a really strong lineup. Starts off with Jim Blockland, who is presenting a new guidance document on managing risk for living walls as cladding, so green walls, which is becoming more popular. So the
Hmm.
insurance industry have now generated a new guidance document, and Jim is presenting that.
Green walls. Expand on that for a little bit for me.
So green walls is very, if I can say, in the architecture world, very de rigueur at the moment, because it obviously gives I hesitate to use the word greenwashing a building, but
Yeah.
it obviously gives it green credentials, because you look at it and it's covered in greenery, be that
Yep.
vines, plants, bushes, whatever else it was. I was lucky enough to be in Italy recently and visited the Bosco Verticale, which is widely recognized as the first green tall building. So this is a high-rise building which is completely green on the outside. Roof and all four walls are completely covered in shrubs, trees, vines, bushes, etc.
And naturally growing ones.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Interesting.
So, and that's becoming more trendy. So you're going to see a lot more buildings now that are going to have hanging gardens down the side of the building,
Yeah.
height, all down the
So I'm
side.
assuming they're also installed with some sort of external drencher to
Yes,
feed them all the time.
yes, that's right. But, people in our industry are going to say, what happens when there's a hosepipe bang? What happens when there's a water shortage and these
Yeah.
things dry out? Because some of them are
Yeah.
sitting in a plant holders. So we're stripping off the combustible cladding on one side of the building, and on the other side of the building, we're putting on plastic plant holders and full of greenery and shrubbery. So,
Yeah.
because,
I can see that. We've got a wildfire on the side of the high rise.
yeah, interestingly, in Australia, where this has become popular, they've seen an increase now in spider bites. So if you want, because you bring you
Yeah,
bring
they'll attract all sorts
you
of,
bring
you
nature into
know,
your building, which it keeps the building cooler. It gives a sense of well-being. There's lots of positives with this. I don't want to be
yeah.
negative about it, but let's have a conversation about what does that mean for firefighters, and I'm going to cover it in
Yeah,
some
you've got to
strength.
be careful sometimes bringing that aspirational goal of making it in keeping with the surroundings and not big, tall, ugly grey buildings and going, okay, but what's realistic and what's safe? And I'm sure they are, God forbid we're having a conversation in the next 5 years about how this has contributed to a disaster. But okay, that's green walls, and we're seeing the proliferation of that across other.
It's certainly becoming, and green roofs. So go up high in London,
Yeah,
or any
sky
other city
gardens.
really, and look down, and you'll notice that there's a lot more greenery now on the roofs of buildings. And we don't really talk about the roof. We've talked about cladding, but
Mm,
what's on the roof of most buildings? Plant rooms, telecom aerials, and things like that. So it is an area that if you were sent up there to fight a fire, there are some innate hazards. I mean, the obvious one is edge protection once you get
mm,
up onto the roof. But if you've got a plant room up there, if you've got, as I know in several buildings in London, you've got transmitting telecoms arrays, which giving
mm,
them, dangerous levels potentially if you get in their way. So those are
yeah.
the kind of issues that But so Jim's talking about that. He's followed by a presentation from the Smoke Control Association on
Mm.
construction of smoke shafts in buildings. So
Smoke shafts and intubescent seals and guards and separation of ventilation. Is that
yeah, because architects don't want to provide the space for natural ventilation because it's much bigger. So there has been a movement to fan assisted shafts to provide ventilation where required. So
okay?
and there's obviously some we know from experience there's some common mistakes that can be made when those things are installed,
Hmm.
and how they operate when they're in fire conditions. So delighted we've got Ian Doncaster from the Smoke Control Association is going to be going through the do's and don'ts of designing, installing smoke shafts in buildings. That's going to be followed by a presentation by a
I
guy.
remember hearing one about a restaurant in London. I think one of our previous guests actually. There was a restaurant on the ground floor or something like that, and they were getting smoke spread on something like the fifth and seventh floors or something like that because rather than doing it externally, for some godly unknown reason, the restaurant had had a full vertical shaft put all the way through the building. I think it was. You may or may not recall this one. I don't know what exactly the name of the incident was, but yeah, the external the shaft for the exhaustion of gases from this restaurant went right up the center of the building, and it was
That's
basic.
not uncommon. So that's a kitchen extract system,
Yeah,
which will probably go up on the roof because they want to discharge.
yeah, but surely just it's a waste of space as well internally to force that thing up through the middle of everything.
There's many reasons why, if it's a prestigious building, they don't want ventilation on the external part of the
No,
building.
they don't want a big ugly shaft going up the side of it.
No,
But yeah, that the maintenance of that, the separation within it, if it has build up and whatnot, how that gets maintained.
well, I got the job at British Airports Authority on the back of the Burger King fire at Terminal 1 in Heathrow, which was
Okay.
a dirty kitchen extract system. So I made a
From a
career.
Burger King, can't imagine why.
Yeah, I made a
Or
career
from
out of
any
kitchen
fast food
extract
restaurant,
systems.
we should say.
Um, but yeah, so ventilation, smoke shaft, do's and don'ts, really important. I mean, my thing here is that of all the building managers that I train and I do around the world, the least understood system in their building is the smoke control solution.
Okay.
They simply don't understand it. And even the building engineer who works in the building, you say, can you tell, is it a pressurization system or a depressurization system? What's that? What's the
Yeah.
difference? And it's some fundamental stuff. So if we can unpack that a bit at the conference, then I'm happy.
Hmm.
That's going to be followed by a presentation by a company called Ambar Kelly, who are one of our sponsors this year. They're doing it's fire stopping of service shafts and other vertical shafts going up and down through the building. So
Fire stopping of service shafts. Okay, yep.
anywhere where you've
Service
got
shafts historically are places where we do a lot of retrospective changes when you get new things put in, you get Wi-Fi on this level, there's an
yep,
issue with the
that's
gas or
it.
the server, so that gets interacted with and manipulated a lot through the life cycle of that building, doesn't it? As services change and require upgrading and all that sort of jazz. And every time an upgrade is done, there's an interaction with the separation within it, isn't there?
Yeah, it's ironic that there was a fire in Madrid, the Windsor Tower fire. It was a few years ago now. But one of the main mechanisms of that fire grew was convected heat up the dry riser shaft. Sorry, the wet riser shaft.
Convected heat through the wet riser
So
shaft.
you've got a
Wow.
fire. You had a fire on a lower floor. The
Yeah.
the fire and heat spread throughout the building horizontally, went
Hmm.
into the wet riser shaft where the wet riser was running up the hot, and it was completely uncompartmented. So you've now got that convected heat going up the wet riser shaft,
Superheating that steel shaft,
coming
yeah.
through coming through on a number of floors because the doors were faulty and not shut, etc. And now you've got fire spreading out through the building through a life safety conduit running through the building. So the irony is,
Wow, there must have been some serious heat going on there.
yeah.
Jesus.
Oh yeah. Well, if you Google it, it's yeah, it was a significant collapse, and yeah, it was like a Tower Inferno type fire.
Okay.
It's a massive fire. Um, that's followed by a presentation from Cider Eyes. Good friend of mine, Shrini, is doing facade fire safety. It's obviously something that's a permanent theme in the conference that we're looking for innovation in facade fire safety,
Hmm.
facade fire testing, and Cider Eyes. produce a lot of products that go in the gap between the floor slab and the facade. So their product is,
Stupid question, but again, I don't want to get people lost in terminology. The facade of the building,
yes.
we're talking about external cladding or external surfaces or things like that. Just talk to us about a little bit around how those two connect with the building and why it could be an issue. Why do we need to be talking about this?
Okay, so the facade is the most expensive element of a tall building. It's the
Okay.
most complex and it's the most expensive bit that you're going to put on your building is the facade. Because if you use, typically at the moment, we use a thing called slip form construction. So we run up a concrete shaft up the center and then we run outriggers from that. And then we then pour concrete and pour floors. So that gives you a kind of central column, a central shaft with the floors, but then onto which we then need to then connect a facade system to keep out rain, weather, and make the building look lovely and sexy.
Yep.
Now, in the past, we would put the facade in between the floors, so the facade rested on the slab. Are you with me?
Yep.
Okay, so that's quite old technology now. Now what you'll do is the facade itself is freestanding and will bear its own weight, and you'll bolt that to the slab. That's generally how
It bears its entire vertical weight.
the majority of it it bears itself on its own steel frame structure that it's slotted into. So if you take curtain wall, for example,
Yeah.
those glass cassettes that drop into that, they sit on top of one another, so that they're largely bearing their own weight.
Oh wow! And you're just attaching it to the external,
Then you attach it to the
so it's
slab.
not load bearing on every floor.
Well, partially it's load bearing, and it depends on the building. But I'm making a generalisation. But
Yeah.
what you end up with is a gap between the floor slab and the facade. Now,
Yep.
if you're talking about a very tall building, then clearly they're going to move, and in some cases it can be meters in high wind that they're going to sway. So,
Okay.
so that fire
That's not
stopping,
remotely disconcerting.
in between the slab and the curtain wall has got to have the ability to compress and decompress and not lose its fire safety integrity. And it's also got to work in the winter,
God.
in the height of winter and the height of summer. So it could be.
Yeah, that's the thing about a tall building, isn't it? You're almost interacting with three or four different types of environment as you go up the height because the way they interact with the environment, the general temperature of day to day, the influence of the wind. This is you're operating in three or four environments, aren't you, as you go up it, I suppose.
Yeah, Siderise have got a great video with one of their fire stopping products, which is effectively sandwiched between the facade and the slab, and they compress it hundreds and hundreds of times during testing to make sure that it will expand and contract a number of times through different ambient heat temperatures to make sure
Yeah.
it works. So that's Srini. Then we've got another sponsor, Girder Security, are doing fire doors in HRBs, higher risk buildings. Where are we? There's quite a lot of misunderstanding at the moment about the role of fire doors. I mean, not their fundamental role in stopping fire spread,
Yeah.
but who's responsible for them and when they should be tested, what
Okay.
constitutes a fire door. These are questions that some people are grappling with at the moment. So I'm hoping that presentation from Fiona Critchley is going to answer a lot of those questions.
As in, just to expand on how that would manifest itself, when fire doors fail, and then we're stood retrospectively pointing at who's been in charge of the maintenance contract of that door, and the manufacturers point at the building manager, and the building manager points at somebody else, and no one's actually been checking it, or the person whose responsibility it is to maintain it doesn't know how to maintain it, so they've not really been doing it.
Classic example is in a high-rise resi block with the right to buy scheme. If you want to buy your own flat under the right to buy scheme, it's not uncommon for people to sort of announce that to the world by changing their front door. So where you've got a standard,
Yeah, I want everybody to know I've paid for this.
so instead of having a standard social housing front door, you then go out and you purchase a door, a Neo Georgian with cat flap and door knocker, etc., etc. And we did have a long debate about who owned that front door in vis-a-vis the sort of common parts of a building. That's
Yeah.
quite clear now. There is an inferred duty of care on the person living in the flat or apartment that they have to make sure that fire door is fit for purpose. So, as I say, if you decide to cut a cat flap in a fire door, it's not a fire door anymore. It's anything else like that. So, but I think who's testing it, how they're being tested is an issue that
That's a very complex problem, isn't it? When you say within the building that you manage, everyone else has now got ownership of a variety of bits, and you can't, when you cross that person's threshold, you're in a man's house, and excuse the sexism within that, but there's different laws around that, isn't it? And you can't impose things on people's personal property.
And crossing, you can't go into somebody's, even if it's a social housing apartment, you can't go in there willy-nilly. You can't just go in there and say, hang on, what you're doing about fire safety in here, is there a problem? It's
Yeah,
quite a difficult thing to do. So, in too far off the subject of fire doors, if you've got something like a hoarder, if you've got somebody hoarding,
yeah,
getting into that hoarding flat and sorting that issue out, because it's a mental health issue, it's not just a
yeah.
lazy person issue, is not an easy thing to do in the UK. Because
Hmm.
our right to live in what's called quiet contentment, which basically means you can't go barging into somebody's flat or apartment willy-nilly.
Yeah, you've got a feel for building managers, haven't you? That's got to be bloody hard.
It is if you know if you've got a hoarder or somebody who's
Yeah.
exhibiting reckless behaviour, which like having barbecues on balconies and stuff like that. It's a tricky one to resolve. But
Mm.
so that's and then we've got CTEC who are talking about 8629 alarm systems for use by the fire service when they turn up.
Okay.
So if you firefighter turn up at a block of flats and it's fitted with one of these systems, what that means is that they can put that floor into fire. They can set off an alarm. It's not a detection system. It's a
Yeah.
manual system for setting off alarms on various floors. So that if
Yeah,
you
you can
want to,
do. So that's when you want to move to a phased evacuation. You can start evacuating and setting
correct.
alarms off on certain floors and do it in a more strategic manner and have stairwell protection teams available on the ninth floor because we're going to evacuate the ninth now. Right, clear. We're going to move to the 10 and 11 now, whatever.
If the building's not behaving itself and you've now got smoke emerging on a number of floors or it's permeating
Yeah.
through wherever, riser shafts or something like that, and you've now got smoke emerging on a number of floors, then you may make the decision that you're going to go, instead of just going for the room of origin or floor of origin, you're going to take 5 floors out. Now,
Yeah.
how do you do that quickly without sending off a bunch of firefighters knocking on doors saying get out, knocking on doors in breathing apparatus, looking like Darth Vader, knocking on the doors saying you've got to leave. So that's the morning of day one. The afternoon of day one starts with Ben Levy, high-rise lead for the National Fire Chiefs Council. Great guy. I
Yeah.
know you know him.
Ben's
He's going to
cool.
be he's going to
Very
be talking
passionate.
about the latest stuff that the NFCC are working on.
Nice.
Then we've got our first international speaker, Captain Mohammed Al-Anai from Abu Dhabi Civil Defence, and he's going to be talking about what they're working on in Abu Dhabi.
Oh,
So
they
that's
are throwing high rises up fast out there, aren't they?
they are, and they've got a lot of experience of dealing with high-rise fires. So
Does that mean they're good at it, or does that just mean they've got a lot of experience with them?
I think they've had more opportunities to learn than some other places. Let me be diplomatic about it.
Very well put. And we can shortcut that again with this shared information. We haven't got to learn the same lessons. We can listen to what they've done about it.
No, absolutely. Then the final presentation on that day is from Julie Butterworth and Andy Fry, and they're from an organisation called TPAS. They're the country's leading organisation in relation to tenant engagement. So
Ah,
they teach and they have great guidance documents for how you engage with tenants, not just on fire, but all aspects. It could be maintenance, it could
yeah.
be any.
Because that's the complicated factor, isn't it? When these issues start to emerge, you need to already have a foundation of a good relationship with your tenants so they trust that what you're saying is what they need to hear and they're going to comply with it because the human factor is the most complex element really when it comes to these things, or it should be the most complex element. Putting the fire out or interacting with the building should be relatively set, standardized guidance. This is the way we do it. We know what we're doing. The human factor and anyone visiting them at that time will be the very complex element. And that'll be the bit that's really spoken about in the news because they'll be the ones that do or don't get out.
It's really important, and they've written some great guidance, which I think has been adopted in a number of places for overcoming that issue about how do we get the occupants to be on, playing their part by telling us about shortcomings of the building. Because, without going through the Grenfell thing too much again, they were complaining about stuff for years and years and years and simply
Yeah.
weren't listened to. And then we finish off each day with a question time, and I'm delighted that this year's question time panel includes Sir Ken Knight, Colin Todd,
Hey.
Colin Todd, which some of your listeners will know, Gary Strong, who's fire lead for the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, Monomer Harrison, who's the safety director at Canary Wharf, and Professor Ed Gallier from Greenwich University. So it's a
Wow, there's some heavy hitters. Colin Todd's written some good books, hasn't he?
Colin Todd is has been one of the stalwarts in the UK fire safety industry, a proud Scotsman. But
I'm going to get him on the podcast. He is going to be a fantastic conversation. I'd love to speak to Colin.
he's not shy in giving you his opinion on a number of
We
things.
love some opinions. Let's have some opinions. And
He's
just to share it. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about, if we don't hear these lessons, then we're doomed to repeat them.
So yeah, that's day one, which I think is good. Day two, we're starting with an architect, Paul Goosey, and he's going to give an architect's view of the two stair issues that we were discussing earlier on. So he's worked closely with the Royal Institute of Architects on this subject, and yeah, he's going to say how it can be this issue can be dealt with at the design stage. Following him, Charles White, who's from a company called Hydra Shoot, he's going to give us the latest innovations on high-rise refuge chutes. So in many high-rise buildings, the way that you get rid of your rubbish is you go to a central core, open a flap, and you chuck your rubbish down, and it goes down
Yeah.
into a bin in the basement. And I think all firefighters are familiar with when you get a fire down in the basement, and then it comes back up that
That
refuge chute.
was actually one of the original motivations for Michael Reich. Was a building that he attended that had a fire in the refuse and it had smoke spread on multiple floors. That's what gave him, I believe, and I may be failing my memory there, but I'm very confident that was one of the initial big motivators where he was like, we haven't got an answer for this.
Yeah, I saw a video at the US conference in April of a fire in Surfers Paradise on the Gold Coast in Australia. So this
Mhm.
is Australia's tallest building, 300 meters.
Ooh,
Fire in the refuse area on the basement. Fire went back up the refuse chute and burnt the rubber seals on the doors on each floor. So this building, which is designed for very limited evacuation, the whole building went into simultaneous with people walking down.
Jesus.
So refuge chutes, they're common, and we have to understand how they're designed. And so Charles is going to be doing that, which is great. I'm pleased to say we've got Carol Lambert from Belgium.
Carol is fantastic. He's very funny.
So he's doing a presentation which is called Murphy Visits Brussels, and I'm assuming that's Murphy's Law Visits Brussels.
Yeah, yeah.
The story of a an older high-rise building fire. So I'm looking forward to that because I know you've spoken to him, but I haven't spoken to him face to face.
Mate, you'll love Carol. Bilingual, incredibly knowledgeable, very, very well educated, very solid grasp of physics, and just the way he relates it as a communicator always comes across very well. I'm very looking forward to seeing him.
Yeah. So and then follow Adam Briggs, who's the fire safety lead for Citizen Housing Group. Now, one of the things you have to produce now for an HRB, a higher risk building, is a safety case. So this is a requirement. And so some of the early adopters that were asked to prepare these safety cases have now submitted to them to the building safety regulator. And Adam's going to be walking us through how they did that and the process and telling us the sort of trials and tribulations of preparing a safety case. So I think that's going to be really interesting. The afternoon session is going to be chaired by Kizzy Augustine from Mishcon. She's a lawyer dealing in this sector, so she's going to be chairing the session. The first speaker, the keynote, is Ben Blackwood, and he's the lead fire engineer for Ballymore Developments,
Okay.
significant property developer in London, certainly in Canary Wharf.
A lot of influence.
Yep. The next one is Elspeth Grant, and she's going to be talking about the controversial subject of the status of PEEPs, personal emergency evacuation plans in risk buildings. So she's been very much at the vanguard of challenging the government on the requirement to do this in high-rise residential, because I'm sure your listeners know that in high-rise residential in the UK, we don't have the same facilities as we would do in a business building, things like refuges, for example.
Well, I think you shone a light on it, and I think it maybe came out in the first inquiry where it was one of the worst cases of not even elitism, but just a complete disregard for people of lower mobility and the lack of preparedness for their personal evacuation plans.
And again, this is anecdotal, but I was talking to somebody who was at the Dagenham fire in London a little while ago.
Hmm.
And apparently there were a couple of people in that building who were in hospital type beds with cannulas in, receiving intravenous drugs, oxygen therapy. Now, you're a firefighter and you're confronted with, you go into a flat and you want them to evacuate and you're confronted with that. What are you going to do?
Leave them. Close the door, make sure there's protection on it, try and stop the fire from getting to them. But like you say, if you've already moved to that, we've recognised the building is failing. God, right, send another two teams up there. We need strops. And we're just going to have to unplug everything and do the best we can. Maybe get a heart team up there, or just let the paramedics on the ground know we're going to be bringing someone down who's already in critical care. And they need to be, if they make it down, they need to be priority.
So the strategic issue for me is, this new government has stated that they want to move healthcare out of hospitals into the community. Now, the reality
Okay.
for that, for us, for firefighters, is there's going to be a lot more people in buildings with a lot more higher medical needs,
Yeah.
oxygen therapy. So you go to a building now, 1 in 5 of us has got a disability, 1 in 4 in urban settings. Of those
Mm.
people, you could go to a building and there could be several people there who are receiving oxygen therapy. So as a firefighter, the reality is you could have oxygen in the building. What does that mean for the fire?
Mm.
So anyway,
There's lots of little bombs put inside these flats, basically.
so after Elspeth, which I think that will be a really controversial subject, Conor Logan from Pulse Ventilation is going to be doing. He's on the one of the panel that's rewriting Trouble 91 for high-rise residential. So he's going to be giving us an overview of what's going to change in the new edition of that, which is due out. And again, lots of controversial stuff in that, I'm told. I don't know. We then got Oliver Sapsford, who's a firefighter in London, but he's doing a PhD into crisis command decision making. So
Oliver's coming on the podcast.
this is great stuff.
Yeah.
So
Very interesting bloke.
he's doing an overview of his studies. That's followed by the day 2 question time, where we've got Claire Norman, who's fire safety lead in Hammersmith and Fulham, Adam Briggs from Citizen Housing, Fiona Critchley, and Ian Moore, who's the CEO of the Fire Industry Association. So that's going to be specifically targeted at just the social housing environment. Okay, so that's day 2. Are you worn out yet?
Brother, we've got a right team of Avengers here. It's incredible. I don't think people are going to have big enough notepads.
Day 3, keynote is Professor Paul Christensen,
Yeah.
electric vehicle lead
Had
advisor.
Paul on a couple of times. People will be familiar with Paul. Absolute wealth of knowledge.
So he came to our last conference. We videoed his presentation, and as of this morning, his presentations had 131,000 views.
Yeah. He's had tens of thousands of listens on the podcast. He's always a very popular guest.
Then we've got, after him, Paul Hales is the fire safety lead in Canary Wharf. And they recently did an exercise with London Fire Brigade, which was the scenario was an EV fire subsurface car park.
Mm-hmm.
And the lessons learned. So he's going to be coming back and giving us feedback from that major exercise that they undertook recently.
That'd be
So
interesting.
it'll be the first time that they fed back on that, which is going to be really interesting. After that, we've got a presentation by the National Association of Air Ductwork Specialists. We were talking about this earlier on. So fire safety issues with dampers in high-rise buildings. So fire dampers, completely essential for stopping smoke and fire travel through buildings, be that they're spring-loaded or motor actuated. I'm a huge fan of fans of motorized actuators linked to a fire detection system as opposed to a fusible link and a spring. So for your listeners, you'll know that in the ductwork there'll be dampers, and these are devices that will shut in the event of fire. Now,
Yeah.
mostly they are either fusible link, which will operate on temperature, or they'll be linked to the fire detection system, and they'll be motored shut by a motorized actuator. And we have a fairly low take-up in this country of motorized actuators, where in other parts of Europe, they only really use motorized actuators.
So just to expand on that, so for people that are unsure with some of the terminology, think of a set of blinds on your windows. that's like the dampeners. So the difference being, if it's temperature actuated, there's almost a biometallic element sometimes in them, whereby when it reaches a certain temperature, it will trigger it and it will close the blinds effectively within there, stopping smoke spread. But the problem is, you will already had a great deal of smoke that would have passed through that under a lower temperature
Correct.
before the point at which it's actuated on the heat element of it. Whereas if it's linked to the fire detection, then the area of origin where that detector has gone off, it will close the vents, close the dampeners further down to stop what has already been fire spread entering that ventilation.
Yeah, and of course, if it has actuated, I'm talking about the fusible link type, is it condition monitored? It probably isn't. So you probably don't know that. It's not linked to the building management system, the BMS. It's probably not linked to that. So it can shut.
Yeah.
Classic one of that was the MGM fire in Las Vegas, where the dampers were closing because it was such high ambient temperatures. And
Yeah.
the case study that I saw is that the maintenance people actually took screws and screwed the dampers open so they wouldn't shut.
Fantastic.
After that, Sam Bryant from OFR. Now, Sam is going to be she did some research on balcony fires and fire safety related issues to balconies, because we know
Hmm.
balconies are getting bigger. They're becoming your alternative front room in the summer.
Hmm.
Sit out there in the city.
Everyone's getting a pizza oven and a grill.
Well, then a long-standing friend of the conference, Professor Guillermo Rain from Imperial College, who's got a number of PhDs working on high-rise fire safety issues. So he's going to be doing a report back on where they are with their current research. Then into the afternoon session, Tom Ross is a senior fire engineer for FM Global, the world's biggest insurance company. And his session's called What the Insurer Thinks. So that'll be a good perspective to come from. And then we've got two colleagues from Frankfurt Fire Service in Germany. And they're going to be talking about how the Frankfurt Fire Service responded to the Grenfell Tower fire and what they've done in Frankfurt since the fire. So that's going to be interesting. After that, Michael Kinsey is going to be doing a session on elevator or lift safety. So he's done a PhD in lift and elevator safety, fire safety. So it is an ongoing theme about what we're going to do about lifts and how we use lifts and elevators going forward and their role, etc. So that's going to be good.
They have their ups and downs, don't they? Sorry, I couldn't stop myself. It's just right in front of me, that was.
Lastly, and fingers crossed that this is going to happen, Jason Hull is a UK firefighter living in Kyiv in Ukraine. He's married to a Ukrainian lady.
Oh, wow.
He came to our conference this year and he did a session which is high-rise firefighting in a war zone. You could have heard a pin drop when he gave his presentation, and I'm hoping that he's going to be able to travel to London for December to do the same thing. But one of the things that he was saying is that the first responders now are being deliberately targeted by the Russians. So they'll send a drone into a high-rise and then they'll wait 25 minutes and they'll send a second drone into exactly the same spot. So, they've suffered a lot of firefighter fatalities, which is deliberate.
Yeah. If you're trying
So
to bomb
anyway,
that building to burn it down, the last thing you want is someone coming in to put it out.
if we get time on the third day, I'll try and get as many of the international firefighters around the table, and we'll have a question time. But it all depends on timing because there's quite a lot in there. So that's the 3 days. I've tried to keep them down fairly short, but hopefully you can tell that it's going to be a fairly intense 3 days. It's going to be a very athletic range of subjects we're going to talk about, and I'm hoping everybody's going to learn it. But at least one of the nights we are being invited to a reception. So, the best work.
Hey, some food and drink.
With a beer in your hand where you'll get to meet all the other people. And we are, as we sit here today on the 3rd of October, we are 160 booked to attend.
Wow.
So our target is around the 200 mark.
So there's not many spaces left for people that are interested in going.
Okay.
If they want to go, we're going to drop some links in below this. So there is some different rates, isn't there, depending on where people are coming from.
Yes. So we have obviously the full delegate rate. We have a heavily discounted rate for serving firefighters. And at the moment, we've got something like 14 of the UK fire services are attending.
Nice.
Sending representatives, but there's a few of those left.
Needs to be a lot more than that, in my personal opinion.
We've got a few of those left because they're limited to 50 spaces. I think we've got about 6 or 7 spaces left.
Wow, okay.
If you are a member of the IFE, the IFSM, then there's also discounted tickets available if you're a member of those organisations. Um, so yeah, I'm looking forward to getting as many people in the room as possible from as wide a background as possible. We are in the process of getting the CPD signed off with the IFE, so you'll get over the course of the 3 days, you'll get something like 18 hours of CPD. So if that's needed for what you're doing, then I mean I think it's essential. But
Well, it
obviously,
helps people get it across the line with their services sometimes as well to justify the cost, which is a real shame because I'll be going there in my personal time because I'm just one of those saddos that has a real tremendous interest in it. But I'm really, really looking forward to it, mate. I'm going to be there for the whole thing, and we're going to be grabbing conversations with you, a number of the speakers, possibly joining in some roundtables, just so that we can truly maximise the output from this incredible group of people that you've managed to get together. I'm really looking forward to it, brother. This is going to go out in October. And we're going to try and turn this round really, really quick for people to be able to jump straight on it and book in, or at least make themselves in attendance in the general area if they can't manage to get themselves a ticket. But I think it's going to be an incredible event, brother. Is there any low hanging fruit? Is there any final pieces we need to leave in the ears of the listener before we wrap it up?
yeah, I think as we grapple with the phase 2 report from Grenfell Tower, there's lots of people that are trying to establish, what is the way forward. And I'm hoping that they may get some answers from this event. That may assist them as we go forward now and try and implement those. Is it 56 recommendations that came out of that? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of work to be done, and if we can get people together and they can say, well, we do it this way, you might learn from that. Plagiarism with pride, and somebody's got a good solution, then let's share that. And let's not try.
Yeah, we were taught in school not to copy each other, but it's a silly idea because actually you don't have to do the work twice, and there's a lot of services and a lot of brigades struggling to find answers, and a lot of organisations, a lot of buildings, they haven't got to reinvent the wheel. A lot of this best practice is being done internationally.
We've got a common purpose, so hopefully
Yeah.
this will facilitate that. So like you, I'm looking forward to it.
100%, brother. Thanks so much for your time today, Russ. I always love talking to you, mate, and I will see you in a couple of months.
Great.